Hi, and welcome to Ginny's Garden Path. Come on down the garden path with me, and we will see if we can find the missing piece to your gardening endeavors. Okay, today we're talking about cool weather vegetables. They are vegetables that can be planted up to 8 weeks before the last expected day of frost in your area. Before you start planting, you want to check your soil and make sure that it is dry enough if you live in a wet area to be planting in. And you can tell that by picking up a handful of soil and squeezing it. If a whole bunch of water runs out, then it needs to dry out more before you start digging in it. You also want to make sure that the soil is not still frozen. So if those two things are okay, then it's always good before planting to amend your soil with 1 or 2 inches of compost, aged steer manure, or worm castings. It's always a benefit to your plants. And one thing I like to use is the Espoma brand organic fertilizers. They are very helpful, and I put a link to those in the description. Um, the plants that you can grow at this time are your root crops like carrots, potatoes, beets, your leafy greens like lettuce and spinach and kale, Swiss chard, your cole crops like broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower, and peas. And you may think that because you can plant peas, you can also plant beans, but beans are a warm weather vegetable that we'll talk about at another time in another video. So when you're planting carrots, um, carrots, beets, spinach can all be planted in a block rather than a single individual row with a big space in between each row. You can plant them in rows as close together as the seeds are in the row. So carrots are planted about 2 inches apart, and they have a very small seed, but it's really beneficial to you to do your best to try and get those seeds about 2 inches apart, because then you don't have to thin as much, and the carrots will grow bigger. You'll have a better production. The other thing that planting in blocks does is that the tops of the plants will shade the soil and hold the moisture in and keep the soil cool, which the plants really like. Um, when you're done planting, then you want to water it really well. Just don't water too strongly, because seeds are planted about 4 times their width in depth. So a really tiny carrot seed would have about 1/8 of an inch of soil sprinkled on the top of it. It's easily washed away, so you just want to water gently, and then you want to cover them with something, because the hardest thing about carrots is getting them to germinate. And usually the problem is that they dry out before they can germinate and set roots down. And so you want to cover them with something. The best thing I like is fresh grass clippings. Now, you have to make sure that the grass that you've mowed had not gone to seed. So take a look at your lawn before you mow it. Make sure there's no seed heads. The other thing is you want to make sure that you've mowed it at least once after you've applied fertilizer, and especially ones that have a pre-emergent. You want to get rid of those clippings and not use them. So if you've got good grass clippings with no seeds, no fertilizer, then you sprinkle those fresh green grass clippings over the top of your planted carrot bed, um, about 1 inch thick. And then the nice thing is the carrots will just grow up through them when they're ready. If you don't have grass clippings, you can use something like a board, cardboard, a tarp, You'll have to hold them down with some rocks on the side. And the thing that's a little harder with these is that you, after a couple of days, you need to check every day to make sure that you take them off as soon as you see little green seedlings coming up through the soil. And carrot seedlings are very tiny. They're like a tiny, tiny, thin blade of grass that's folded over. And so you have to get right down next to the soil and take a good look to make sure that you see them when they're coming through the soil. And then you remove those things. And then it's important to keep the soil moist. If you don't have boards or cardboard or grass clippings, then it's important that you water the bed 2 to 3 times a day until they have sprouted and are kind of established. Things like your lettuce, spinach, and beets are planted 3 to 6 inches apart. Beets will be 3 inches apart. Lettuce, because it grows to be a fairly large plant, should be 6 inches apart. You can plant them 3 and then thin. And then let's see, cabbage, your broccoli, cauliflower, your cole crops, they need about 2 feet around to get to be able to have room to grow once they get big and are producing. They're best, I feel, planted as plants. So you can buy those at the store, or you can start them under lights. Some people even plant a lot of these seeds in the fall or in a warm spot in the middle of the winter, and then the seeds just come up when the conditions are right. Then potatoes are another one of your root crops, and potatoes need to be planted a foot apart. You cut your potatoes into 2-inch chunks, and you want between 2 and 4 eyes in each piece. If you want large potatoes, then you plant them with just 2 eyes in each piece. If you want a bunch of new potatoes that are little, then give them 3 or 4 eyes. Some people, you can buy seed potatoes. They're guaranteed to have no disease. And if you're going to plant multiple times or like every season, then that can be a valuable thing. You can plant the grocery store potatoes, but know that they may have some disease that could stay in your soil. They can also be sprayed with a thing to stop them from sprouting. So with those, I would always want to plant ones that you're already seeing that they're sprouting. And then, oh, excuse me. The other ones that you can plant is ones you've grown the year before. You just keep potatoes that are about that big around and keep them in a cool place through the summer until you can plant them in the fall. Or you can keep them through even the winter and plant them in the middle of March. So the other one that you can plant is peas. So why don't you come out with me and we'll plant some peas. Okay, so we're going to plant some peas. I've taken the pea seeds and had them soaking in some water overnight. It just helps them to germinate quicker. So I'm going to take them out of this dish. I'm going to put them in here. And the one thing that we like to do is to get some garden inoculant. Peas have a great ability to take nitrogen out of the air, and they store it in little nodules in the roots. And so if you dust them with some garden inoculant, it will help them do that. So what they do is store the nitrogen so that they can use it through the season. You don't really have to fertilize peas because of that. It's kind of a black stuff like that, just a tiny bit, and give it a shake. That's all you need. And we'll go over and plant some peas. I've spread compost along the edge of this bed where I'm going to plant the peas, and I'll dig that in before I put the peas in. That'll help hold moisture and give some extra nutrients to the pea plants. So I've mixed the compost in, and as you can see here, there's a good mixture of both compost and dirt, soil. It's important to have enough soil so that as you plant, that your seeds will have good contact with some soil, and it's not so light and fluffy with, grass or leaves or whatever, that they end up drying out. Like if I was to plant it in, say, this little pile here, it's so light and airy, the pea seed would dry up before it actually had roots to take hold. So this is much better, and I just stirred the soil and the compost together and broke up any larger pieces of compost so that they aren't restricting any root growth. A general rule of thumb when planting is to plant the seeds about 3 or 4 times its own width, that deep. So pea seeds are going to be 3/4 of an inch to an inch deep, and I'm planting them 2 inches apart here, but I'm also going to make 3 rows because 3 rows seems to be the sweet spot when going up a trellis. I've tried it with 2 rows and I've tried it with 4, and 3 seems to be the perfect amount of foliage up on a trellis to have good production. So what I do is once I've got 1 row here, I just take my hand and a couple of inches away, just make a new row, and in the processes of making that new row, it covers the previous one. And when the last row of seeds has been covered up, then you just pat it all down good so there's good contact. It doesn't have to be really hard, but just enough so that the seeds have good contact with the soil. The last thing after planting that you'll want to do is water the area so that your seeds have some good moisture. My soil here is quite damp right now, and we're about to get a rainstorm, so I won't need to water mine, but especially if you are in a dry area or the soil is dry, it's good to give it a good watering. You'll notice that when you plant things in the early spring, because the daylight is shorter and the temperatures are cooler, that your soil doesn't dry out as quickly as it does in the summer. So the needs for watering are a little bit less, but it is still important to keep the soil moist. And last but not least, make sure that you put in some kind of a marker that tells you what you planted, especially when you plant things in the fall to come up in the spring, or in early spring later down the road when you're planting warm weather vegetables, or you're trying to plant other cool weather vegetables. It'll be important to know where you've already planted. I know this from experience. More than once I've accidentally planted right over the top of something else, and it's not a fun thing. A couple more things I wanted to tell you about potatoes. What you want to do is dig a hole about 8 to 12 inches deep. Throw your amendments in there, your compost or manure or whatever you're doing, and then put your potato piece down in there. Knock a couple of inches of soil onto it, and then as it sprouts and grows up, you can keep knocking the soil in and fill up that hole. Potatoes grow their roots from those eyes downward, And then as they send up their stems, they grow runners out to grow the potatoes up above that. So that gives them a good amount of soil to send out runners for those potatoes. The other thing is that some people will say, cut your potatoes and let them scab over. That's a really good thing to do if you live in a wet area, because it helps them not to rot before they send out their roots. In the dry area, like we live here in the desert, it's not really a problem. So I've grown lots of potatoes where I just cut them and shove them in the ground. As for your peas, the one thing I would encourage you to do is to make sure that as soon after you've planted them, that you put up a trellis for them to grow onto. It's really hard and not productive to wait until it's a big ball of vines and then try and pick them up and train them onto a trellis. They have kind of stiff, crispy vines, and they break really easily. And so you'll end up breaking off way more of your pea vines, and then you just lose that much of your harvest. So get that trellis out there, and before the pea plants are putting up their little tendrils, looking for something to climb on. So there's two reasons why we use trellises. One is that it allows the vines to be up off the ground. It allows good airflow and more sunlight to get to the plants, and that increases your production. It also helps avoid some pests and some diseases that you would get on the vines from the soil. It also, for things like squash and pumpkins and stuff, it's helpful because with squash bugs, because it gives them less places to hide under their big leaves. The other reason is that it increases your amount that you can grow in your garden space. If you can have the roots of a plant down in the garden soil and all the vines up on a trellis, it leaves your garden spot free to plant more plants. So let's go out and take a look at some of the trellising ideas. Okay, I wanted to show you some different ways that you can trellis vegetables up onto in the garden. These are one type. It's just an A-frame that sits in the garden, and you just push it down. They work very well. I'm putting these over my pea where I planted peas, and they're very strong and they do well in wind. Another kind of trellis is ones that you can buy, and they are collapsing, folding like this. They can come just in a 2-section or a 4-section, and you can put those in. I put them in between these ones just because they're a little bit shorter than my bed is. The nice thing is that they can adjust to the space that you have. The only thing is, because they have that joint in them, is that they're not super sturdy in real windy areas, and I wouldn't put anything that's super heavy. I wouldn't put a giant squash or plant like that on it, but they're great for peas. Another nice way to trellis vegetables is to use these cattle panels or sheep panels. Cattle panels are 50 inches wide, and the sheep panels are 48 inches wide. They're both 16 feet long. The cattle panels have a little wider opening, but the sheep panels have openings that are good enough. We've just taken them and wedged them at the bottom between the two beds, and then attached them, wired them to these T-posts. And it works really nice. They're extremely sturdy. You can leave them out all winter. They don't have to be taken in at the end of the season. And they're really good for pretty much all of your vegetables, even the big ones, large squash, watermelon, cucumbers, other kinds of melons, beans, peas, and they're nice because you can walk under them and they look really nice. So they're very sturdy and they will last for many years. If you've bought tomato cages, you've seen a lot of them that look like this. I've cut this one in half and used it for other things because they're about useless for tomatoes, especially indeterminate ones that grow really long and have a lot of vining, and the ones that are determinate that grow only to a certain height don't usually need to be have any kind of a support. So instead of using these for tomatoes, I cut the whole thing in half, and I use this half to support things like my pepper plants, and so they'll just go in the soil like that. Another one to use them for is like zucchini and your yellow crookneck squash. They don't vine and trail everywhere, but you can help them not get have as such a problem with your squash bugs if you can get them up off the soil. And so I'll take them and lift the leaves up as they grow so that they stay up off the soil. This part I turn upside down like this, and I put them in the soil and put Walla Waters around them. And in a future video on warm weather crops, I'll show you the Walla Waters, where you can put a tomato plant out about a month earlier than usual. And so that's what I use those for. If you want something that actually supports your tomatoes really well, I use these, and they're just a kind of a triangle. The plant sits right in there, and as it grows up, then I put the leaves and the branches out on either side, and so they just go in the soil and the plant grows up like this. So you can put those in, but the vining types of tomatoes that grow long branches will grow out beyond this, and you can put more of these around in the bed and run their branches through those. Or what I do is I get these cheap bamboo sticks and I'll run them from one of these to a neighboring one. I also plant my peas on the north side of my tomatoes and my potatoes, because the tomatoes and potatoes will grow up in front of the peas and shade them. And then after the peas are done and the heat comes along and they get all crispy and you rip them out, I leave the trellises up and then use them to support these things, to support the tomato plants. Now there are quite a few different ways of putting these. Some people take the wire that has 6-inch holes and they'll make a big ring of it and stand those up for the tomatoes. While they do a good job, the one thing that's hard is if there's a lot of wind. The one thing you'd want to do is put some deep wire, U-shaped wire things down into the soil to hold those in place so that when the wind comes, they don't fall over. For this trellis, I've just got a pipe at each end of my bed, and we've got a 10-foot long. You can use fir strips, you can cut a 2x4 in half, and they roll up at the end of the season. And I'll get this trellis netting untangled and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so we got this untangled, and What we have here is this fir strip, or in this case it's a half of a 2x4. We have some carriage bolts, and they just need to be long enough to go through your board, through the PVC, have enough to put a nut on the far side. So you drill through your PVC, through the board, and put that on. And then you can buy these trellis things, and depending on the size of your trellis, you just buy your trellis netting enough so it can go up over the board and back down to the ground. And your PVC is 3/4 inch, the Schedule 40 PVC, and it goes up and goes on that piece of pipe or your rebar, if that's what you have. These particular garden beds are tall, they're 2 feet tall. I have some that are only 16 inches tall, and so I have these trellises with PVC that is 5 or 6 feet tall. So you just make it the length that you need it. PVC comes in 10-foot long pieces. Cutting a piece in half gives you both ends of your trellis. It's a good height for like peas. I've done cantaloupe and beans. And in 30 years of using these, the only thing that has ever broken the top bar was when I had a 36-inch long banana squash hanging off of it, and it did really well. If you want to go up a step as far as the strength of your trellis netting, you can buy these pretty inexpensive. They have 6-inch wide holes, easy to reach through and to pick from. But the other thing you can do is get the 16th inch wide cord that is rated for outdoors, and you can cut pieces and tie these nettings, and those things will last you. I have some that are 30 years old, and they work really great. So, and they're easy to do. If you don't have a spot like in the corner of my bed here to put a piece of pipe, you can always use a 2-foot piece of rebar that you can either put down in those holes like in my bed, or you can take them and pound 1 foot down into the ground wherever you need the trellis. And they're easily taken up at the end of the season or left in for the winter. So you can put those, use those instead of the pipe that I showed you. The other thing that you want to do is, once you've got your trellis up, is that you want to stake the trellis material down so that you have kind of a nice taut structure to your trellising. So by staking it down, it makes it nice and tight. These pins are really useful in the garden. I use them for staking down the drip system pipes, for staking down the trellising material. They're just useful for a whole lot of things, and I've put them and the garden inoculant and a few things into the description, links to those things in the description of this video. And then at the end of the season, you just pick them up, fold up the legs like that. Oop. There you go. And roll it up, and you can put it away for storage. If you really want a fancy trellis, you can do something like this arbor that my husband built, and it's beautiful.
and sturdy. It's well over 20 years old, this one is, and it has my climbing clematis on it. So you can go from very inexpensive and movable trellises to ones that are very permanent and beautiful.
Okay, so your peas will grow up onto those trellises, and early on the trellises give them all the sunlight that they need and stuff. But as the temperatures get hotter, the advantage of those potatoes and tomatoes growing in front of them is that they cool them and offer some protection from the sun later in the afternoon. um, so one other thing I need to talk about is onions. I love growing Walla Walla sweet onions. You can grow onions from sets, or which are little dried onions that were grown the year before, partway through the season. They've been pulled up and dried, and then you grow them the following year. But the interesting thing about onions is that they grow their bulbs the first year. And if they're allowed to grow a second year, they don't grow really big bulbs the second year. They focus on growing seeds. So I prefer to grow my onions either straight from seeds planted in the fall, or my favorite is to buy the bare root, or in little pony packs, the small onion plants. And you plant them 4 inches apart. You cover just the white part that's right above the roots. And onions, especially Walla Walla sweet onions, are a day-long onion. What they do is they grow their green part during when the nights are long and the days are short. And then when they get about 14 hours of sunlight, they stop growing their tops and they grow their bulb. The thing that you have to know is that then at the end of the season, when the days get shorter and they have less than 14 hours of sunlight, they'll stop growing their bulb and they'll start growing the green top again. But this time they take the energy out of the center of your bulb. So here in Utah, the first week of August, you have to pull your onions. Otherwise, if you leave them and they can start growing those tops again, it makes the centers of the onions all mushy and ruins them. So you plant them if you as close to the middle of March here in zone 6, and that gives them lots of short days to grow lots of green top, and that determines how big of a bulb that they will grow later in the season. You also want to continue to fertilize those until their bulbs start pushing the soil out, and then you stop fertilizing. And we've grown onions that are well over a pound. Um, and so they are a great cool weather vegetable. So that concludes our video for today. If you have questions, put them in the comments in caps so that I can answer them. And you can, oh, I guess you can't make any comments. No, okay, apparently you can't make any comments, so you'll have to email those questions to me. The other thing is if you're not on my Facebook page called Down the Garden Path and you'd like to be, just message me and I will add you. I put additional timely information there in between videos, and we'd love to have you on there. I've left links in the comment or in the description to for the garden inoculant, for the pins, the trellis netting, and the Espoma plant tone fertilizer, which is what I use for a lot of these vegetables. And any of the Espoma fertilizers are great for various growing situations in your yard. I did the 36-pound one for the plant tone only because it's so much cheaper than the 4-pound one. If you found this video helpful, you're welcome to like and subscribe. And if you hit the little bell, that will give you alerts to future videos. Thanks so much for watching. And the more you know, the more you'll grow.